up? Welcome to live stream number 55. I always have to do a little countdown because you don't know exactly when the live stream is going to start. That's why I do my little dance and my little countdown to get ready for the live stream. And now I am attempting to pull it up. Here we go. Here we go. Feel free to drop any questions or comments for me in the live chat and YouTube. Man, my eye is itching like crazy. Whoa. That was a serious eye itch. That was a serious eye itch that needed to be addressed immediately. All right, first up in the program today, content pillars. So this is something that my buddy Steve first told me about. And when he first described it to me, I didn't really get it. He was like, do you know what your content pillars are? And I was like, what? And basically the idea of, there's probably a better explanation of content pillars somewhere, but the idea of content pillars when you're putting out content is that you end up having like a relatively small number, like maybe it's 3 or 4 or 5 of sort of like high level topics that you come back to over and over again. And it's a useful exercise to sort of think about what your content pillars are. And it's something I've been trying to think more about. And I think it's something I'm getting a better idea of iteratively as I go. You know, I talk a lot about remote work. I'm starting to talk about content a lot. I talk about, you know, developers, developer life, things like that. And so, you know, you sort of, once you kind of know what your pillars are, you kind of can get comfortable with that, and you can kind of organize the things you talk about into those pillars or segments, whatever you want to call them. And that's been something I've been starting to do. It's been helpful to kind of get my content organized, and also helps you to tailor your content to different audiences. You know, so for example, I'm getting better about that. If I talk about something that's related to running a business or building a product or building a startup, that's not super relevant to all of my, you know, audience that maybe are like Magento developers, right? So keeping those things segmented is helpful. So yeah, figure out what your content pillars are, Brosif. Okay, next up, dealing with unresponsive clients. So this is something that you probably dealt with if you deal with clients, whether as a freelance developer, an agency owner, a business owner of some kind. You've probably dealt with clients that are unresponsive. And one, you know, example I can think of back from my days as a project manager is like you're collecting requirements. And, you know, clients are notoriously slow at getting you those requirements and clarifying questions, and you end up just kind of waiting around forever. And this is something I deal with from time to time, you know, if it, with what I do, where, you know, you want clients to be responsive in terms of if you refer a candidate, things like that. You want their, like, I'm really big on, you know, with Commerce Hero, on responsiveness on both sides of the aisle. You know what I mean? Responsiveness of the developer, the candidate, responsiveness of the client. And so this is something I've dealt with personally. And I think that, you know, my approach to it maybe can be a little bit overkill, is to like, I think you have to get to the point where you can sort of be comfortable letting somebody go and being like, look, maybe this isn't a fit. Maybe you know, maybe you are a little too busy right now for what I need from you. And I think if you can get to the point where you're okay, it's not that you have to fire a client, but to have a clear understanding of what your expectations are as far as responsiveness goes, and for you to communicate that clearly. And to, you know, to just, to know, to understand what you need, and to say, look, if you guys are not able to do that, you don't have to even get contentious about it. It's just like, look, I get it. I understand. It's maybe not a fit right now. And either, the client will be like, okay, it's not a fit, they're busy. Or they'll be like, oh, wow, like we really have to increase our responsiveness if we want to work with this person. And you have to have a certain amount of confidence, I think, to do that, because if you don't, then you're going to end up being like, oh gosh, I have to bend over backwards in order to make this work, even though the client is not being responsive. I got to bend over backwards to make them happy or to try to get the job done. But sometimes that can kind of backfire, because the more you bend over backwards and the less responsive they become, and then their expectation gets cemented that no matter how non-responsive they are, you're going to try to bend over backwards to make it work. And a lot of times things just won't go anywhere. So I think it's important to be like, listen, this is what I need to get this job done. And if you can't do it, then this may not be a fit. So I think that's something that might be worth trying out. All right. What's next up here? Building systems. Let me just readjust. Got to get nice and comfortable here. Nice and cozy. All right. Building systems. So, this is something I realize is that one of my, I think one of my core strengths is in sort of building systems, systematizing things. And I was just thinking through kind of my own strengths and weaknesses. And I think that my strength is in, seeing something that needs to be systematized, building a system for it, and then going beyond to just building the theoretical system, but actually doing the grunt work to actually prove the concept and get it going. But then the challenge I face many times is after I get to that point, I have a hard time extracting myself from the day to day so that I can just focus on building the systems, improving that system, or moving on to building the next system. And I think that I just have to, I think for me, I have to stay in that zone of building systems, building prototyping. And then I have to get better at bringing a team in to run the system once it's built. So yeah, that's just sort of a just self-reflection type thing, but it may be relevant to other people. Figuring out where your zone is, of where you're most effective, what you're best at, where you really get into a flow state, what you enjoy doing, basically where you create the most value, and staying in that zone. And then the zones where you're not as effective, where you find yourself more frustrated, where you're not as productive, trying to find ways to get out of those zones, basically. So all right, next up, Nocode job creation. Going to do a quick screen share. I've got my new screen share layout here. Kind of fancy. This is a tweet from Stephen Renwick. The no-code movement could be one of the biggest changes to working and technology we've seen, and has the potential to somewhat offset the job loss impact of AI and robotics automation of everything. My money is on Bubble Group. And he was tweeting. He was retweeting a tweet from Jason Calacanis. If you're wondering, the easiest way for a, quote, nobody to win big right now is called Nocode. If writing code isn't appealing, stop watching TV for 6 months and jump down the rabbit hole of Zapier, Webflow, Slack, if this, then that, Airtable, etc., etc. And, this is super interesting. I have I've been looking at Nocode and stuff, and it's interesting to see characters like Jason Calacanis getting excited about Nocode and some heavy hitters as far as Silicon Valley investors. I had somebody tell me recently that a VC fund said that half of the deals that they're seeing have a dependency on Zapier for some functionality or another. And Webflow's picking up steam. It's all picking up steam. It's super interesting. And I was thinking that, we talk a lot, we worry about job loss with automation, with self-driving cars, with AI. And historically, every time technology kills jobs, something comes up to replace those jobs. And it's always unexpected, right? Nobody expected that when the washing machine was created that hotels would begin to have concierges. Like, nobody foresaw that. And so the optimists say, listen, it's going to be the same as it's always been throughout history. And then the pessimists or realists are like, no, this is different. This is different. It's going to be much, much worse. And I was thinking, maybe Nocode is maybe Nocode ends up being the technology that comes out of nowhere to replace tons of those jobs. Because up until now, we've thought, well, the technical class is doing great. The software developers are doing great. Being able to build software, which is super high margin. But what about and then there's a movement, everybody should learn to code, which you could argue that different ways. But I think the no-code thing kind of almost bypasses that argument, because if non-technical people can really create meaningful software on the web and on mobile, that's kind of a game changer. And there's that whole thing about truck drivers should learn to code, and then people were like, that's not realistic. But it's much more realistic, and there's still challenges, but it's much more realistic for a truck driver to learn to do something with no code than to learn to code. So maybe this is it. Maybe 20 years from now, we look back and we go, wow, a lot of these jobs were killed, and now a whole bunch of people created their own products, their own super niche web products, right? That's a really interesting potential future. So super optimistic about no code. Interesting space to watch. Watch this space. All right, next up here. What's going on with my screen share, man? What is going on with my screen share? Oh, that's what's going on. All right, cool. What's your message? Next up, what's your message? This is something I've been thinking about as I'm doing content and stuff like that, and thinking about, like I remember being asked before, like, if you could give a TED Talk, what would your TED Talk be on? And I was like, I have no idea, And sometimes I think, if you were going to write a book, what would your book be about? And I'm like, I don't know. I have no idea. And, as I'm doing this video content, stuff like that, more, and basically spending more time thinking about ideas and then trying to communicate ideas. And as you do that iteratively, you sort of refine. I talked earlier on in the stream about your content pillars. You sort of refine what are your core messages, or core message or messages, whatever. And it's one of the things I'm really enjoying about this is the discovery of what is my message. Like, what is it that I really want to say to the world? I think in the past I've been like, I don't really know. Like, I know I'm interested in some of these things, and but what's the big thing? Like, I don't know. and just being honest with myself about that. But then moving from that place to iteratively refining different ideas, and as I communicate something and get feedback on it, and then come at it from a different angle and think about a different aspect of no code, different aspects of remote work and things like that. I realize that I think I'm getting to the point where I'm discovering what my message is, and it's kind of cool, and I think for others out there that are either, whether you're creating content or interested in creating content, or even if you're not, I think it's sort of in some ways sort of universally important as a human being to sort of figure out, like, what's your message? What is it that you want to say to the world? What is it that you think about the world, about life, about work, about whatever? And so, yes, I think it's pretty much for everybody. I think it's worth figuring that out, and it takes time. I think I'm realizing, like, it's for me, it takes a lot of time. Probably for some reason, for some people, it comes very naturally, and ever since they were 12 years old, they kind of know what their message is, their mission in life. And for me, it's just taking forever to figure out, but it's a cool process. So figure that out. Figure out what your message is, man. All right, next up, B2B products that people love. Quick screen share here. I gotta say, I'm digging this screen share layout. I am not gonna lie. I saw an abbreviation for not gonna lie, NGL. I was like, what's NGL? Not gonna lie. There's a tweet from Whale, Twitter handle Whale. What are your favorite B2B companies that you use and that you know of? And I saw some cool replies in here. Reply here mentioning Stripe, Linode, Amex. Scott over here mentioning Postmark. Ryan here mentioning Gusto, Shopify, and I replied with Stripe, actually. And what I thought was interesting about this, there's so much. Well, within B2B, there's a lot. There can be a lot of tools that you use because you just got to use them to get the job done. You don't particularly love them, maybe. So, generally speaking, when it comes to products, web services, there's a lot of sort of negative reaction to a lot of the major web platforms, whether it's social media or other types of products. And so there can be a lot of negativity around different products for one reason or another. Or on the flip side, there can be just like, it's just something I have to use, but I don't really love it, so to speak. And I was thinking about Stripe, and I was like, man, I really am grateful for Stripe. Like, and my tweet was like, they've enabled me to make a living for the past 6 or so years, as I've used them as a core part of my last couple of businesses that enabled me to get paid, and yeah, there's other payment processors that could have worked, but API integrations I've had to build and different things like that. Like, I'm like, man, Stripe is awesome. Like, I'm so grateful for it as a product, and thinking about what it's enabled me to do, enabling me to make a living, is pretty special. And a lot of people are commenting on different products that they really love for one reason or another. And I think that these products are obviously doing something right. When you have users that don't just use the product, but they really love it, you're doing something special there. And that is deserving of kudos. So kudos to all y'all. Okay, next up. Social guest pass for Imagine. So this is cool. Pull this up real quick. I saw this tweet from Brendan Falkowski for Adobe Summit / Magento Imagine 2020. These are the two best conference registration add-ons I've seen. One is a guest pass. The other is a offset travel emissions using TerraPass. The guest pass popped out to me. It's a social guest pass. Access to the welcome receptions and Summit Bash must be over 21, one per attendee, $200, which is quite a bit less than the full price of the ticket, which is I think 15 or 100 or 1600, something like that. And it's cool. Like, this is the closest thing I think I've ever seen to a hallway track, which I have to admit I'm usually rocking the hallway track at these conferences. And I think it's cool to actually formalize that as a pricing option. Now these are guests. These are for guests. So I guess somebody has to buy the main ticket and get you the guest pass. But I just think it's cool to have essentially something close to a hallway track option. Now, I don't know if you'd have the hallway track for the entire conference, or it's just a welcome and it's just sort of a welcome reception and the party. So it's maybe not exactly a hallway track, but like I said, relatively close enough. I thought that was an interesting option there, and will be interesting to see everybody at Adobe Summit 2020. So looking forward to that. Okay, well, that is all I have for you today. Hope you have a fantastic rest of your Tuesday, and